You've arrived, and that means something. Not everyone finds their way here, through the noise, through the neon, through the bright blizzard of modern days, but you did, so sit. The fire's still warm, and the night hasn't grown too deep yet. If the glow feels steady, if the quiet feels earned, go ahead and like the video or subscribe, if the quiet feels right. And if you're out there, wherever your longhouse stands, leave a sign. Tell me where you are, what time the sky turned dark. I like to think of us all, scattered and still, stitched together by sleep and silence. Now pull your blanket up to the collarbone. Let the air cool just enough to remind you where you are. The day is done. You don't have to hold anything now. We rest, like they did, together. In the quiet hours after sunset, as the golden glow of the hearth fire flickered and cast long, swaying shadows across the wooden beams of a Norse longhouse, the Viking family of Thorvald began to wind down for the night. The scent of smoke mingled with wool and warm bread, and the air settled into a hush, broken only by the crackling fire and the faint creak of wood shifting in the cold. While we, in the 21st century, often lie awake, restless beneath synthetic lights, haunted by notifications and glowing screens, the Vikings, some of the fiercest warriors in history, embrace sleep with a simplicity and effectiveness we've long forgotten. It might seem strange, even ironic, to imagine that a culture known for conquest and sea raids also mastered the art of rest. But as we step inside Thorvald's world, we begin to uncover a lifestyle that perhaps unknowingly aligned perfectly with the natural sleep cycles our bodies still crave today. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from 793 to 1066 CE, was a time of seafaring exploration, craftsmanship, and deep connection with the Earth's rhythms. In these northern lands, where daylight and darkness shift dramatically with the seasons, the people didn't force sleep into rigid blocks. Instead, they let the night guide them. As dusk arrived, so too did a natural surrender to rest. Thorvald was a shipbuilder, living on the coast of what we now call Norway. His days were long, filled with the sound of axes on timber and the rhythm of waves against the shore. But his nights were quiet, predictable, and nourishing. In the glow of the hearth his family would gather. They shared food early in the evening, perhaps a stew of fish and barley, warm goat milk, and fermented vegetables. They told stories, some from myth, others from memory. And then as the stars rose, they laid themselves down on straw and wool wrapped in furs, in complete darkness. No buzzing street lights, no digital alarms, no urgency. The sleep that followed was natural, segmented, and rich. Thorvald, like many of his peers, practiced what modern scientists now call biphasic sleep, 2 periods of rest, separated by a quiet, wakeful hour in the middle of the night. This wasn't a disruption, but a gift. During that time he might stoke the fire, check on the livestock, or whisper to his wife. It was a sacred pause, a calm moment of reflection before the second descent into slumber. While today we chase the elusive, perfect 8-hour sleep, the Vikings lived a version of it long before clocks dictated their routines, and the evidence is everywhere. In the bones unearthed from Viking graves showing signs of good health and low stress, in the sagas that describe nighttime rituals and the use of calming herbs, in the architecture of their homes, which blocked out light and held in warmth. This was a society that didn't just sleep, it lived in harmony with sleep. As Thorvald moved through his evening routine, his young daughter, Freya, nestled into the furs beside her mother. The warmth of shared body heat, the smell of fresh hay beneath them, and the distant lull of ocean wind created a sensory cocoon that lulled the body into rest. There was no anxiety about sleep, no fear of not waking up refreshed. The body knew what to do. The mind followed. Outside, the winter wind brushed softly against the turf walls. Inside, the hearth dimmed to embers. Soon, only the sound of breathing remained. This was no accident. Viking life supported sleep at every turn. Their food was rich in nutrients that promote rest. Oily fish full of omega-3s, whole grains, root vegetables, and fermented dairy. Their homes were dark, cool, and free of disruptive noises. Their days were filled with physical labor that tired the body without overwhelming the mind. And their culture viewed rest not as laziness, but as a necessary part of living well. And so Thorvald slept. And as he did, the rhythms of his world continued. The fire glowed low, the animals stirred quietly in their pens, the moon moved across the sky, and in that deep, ancient silence, his body repaired itself, his mind processed the day, his spirit rested. In our modern world, we seek sleep through apps, supplements, and endless advice. But perhaps what we need is not more effort, but less. Not more light, but darkness. Not more stimulation, but stillness. What if the best sleep isn't found in a bottle or on a screen, but in the quiet wisdom of those who came before us? As we continue this journey into Viking sleep, we'll follow Thorvald and his family through the seasons, across long nights and bright days. We'll explore the rituals, habits, and hidden knowledge that allowed them to sleep deeply, live fully, and rise with strength. But for now, imagine yourself there, beside the hearth. Feel the warmth on your skin. Hear the wind outside. Let the crackle of the fire calm your mind. The world has slowed, the night has come, and there is nothing left to do but rest. Close your eyes, sleep like a Viking. The night was deep and still over Bjorn's farmstead, nestled in a snowy valley of central Norway. A thick frost clung to the thatched roof as the stars overhead shimmered in the crisp winter sky. Inside the longhouse, the fire burned low but steady, and silence settled gently over the wooden beams like a second blanket. It was not yet midnight, but Bjorn's first sleep was coming to an end. For most of us in the modern world, waking in the middle of the night feels like a problem. We reach for phones, worry about tomorrow's tasks, and count the hours of rest slipping away. But for Bjorn, waking in the middle of the night was as natural as sleeping itself. In the Viking Age, this period, known later as the waking watch, was a peaceful interlude between two distinct phases of rest, first sleep and second sleep. Bjorn stirred quietly on the straw-lined sleeping platform, careful not to wake his wife, Solveig, or their two children tucked into the furs beside them. He sat up, ran a hand through his thick beard, and slipped his feet into wool-wrapped sandals. The air inside was cold, but not biting. The embers still glowed softly in the hearth, casting faint orange light on the rough-hewn walls. He moved with practiced quiet, stepping over the sleeping dog curled at the foot of the bed, and added a split log to the fire. Sparks jumped briefly, then settled as the wood caught. It was the same routine every night in winter. A few hours of deep, heavy sleep after sundown, then a wakeful pause that lasted an hour or two, not rushed, not anxious, simply awake. This pattern wasn't unique to Bjorn. Across the Viking world, from the fjords of Norway to the settlements in Iceland and the British Isles, people experienced the night in two parts. Archaeological evidence and saga texts alike described this segmented sleep as commonplace. They called it Første Sveffen and Annen Sveffen, first and second sleep. Between them, a window of stillness. Bjorn pulled his cloak from the wall peg and stepped outside, the cold brushing his skin like a whisper. The sky was black and endless, broken only by the glow of the moon reflecting off the snow-covered ground. He walked to the edge of the stable, checking the animals. The goats stirred, recognizing his quiet steps, but remained calm. A frost had formed on the wooden latch of the door. He smiled slightly. Everything was as it should be. This brief waking time was practical, but also spiritual. It allowed Vikings like Bjorn to perform small tasks, tending the fire, stretching sore muscles, whispering thoughts into the silence of the night. In some homes, it was a time for intimacy, in others for prayer. Some sat in quiet reflection, others shared soft words with loved ones. Back inside, Bjorn took down a small clay mug and poured himself a cup of warm herb broth left near the fire. It had steeped since evening, hops and chamomile, a mix Astrid the healer had recommended. As he drank, he glanced toward the children, wrapped tight in furs. Their sleep was undisturbed, their faces peaceful. He returned to the hearth and sat on a small stool, letting the heat rise against his back. There was a tranquility to this hour that Bjorn treasured. The world was hushed, there was no work to be done, no tools to lift or boards to carve, just stillness. And in that stillness, thoughts moved differently, more slowly, more kindly. It was a space not just between sleeps, but between worlds. Modern sleep researchers have begun to rediscover what Bjorn and his ancestors lived daily, that the human body may be better suited to segmented sleep. Studies show that our internal clocks often include a natural period of wakefulness about 4 to 5 hours into the night. In today's world, this often manifests as insomnia, but to the Vikings, it was simply part of the night's rhythm. By allowing this pattern, rather than resisting it, the Vikings avoided the stress so many of us feel when we wake too early. They didn't fight to return to sleep instantly. They didn't panic. Instead, they accepted the interlude, and then gently returned to their bedding for the second sleep. As Bjorn finished his drink, the fire had regained its strength. Shadows danced gently across the fur-draped walls. He stood, stretched, and lay back down beside Solveig. She stirred only slightly, instinctively shifting closer to his warmth. He pulled the wool over them both and closed his eyes. The second sleep would carry him to dawn. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees. Snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. In the longhouse, the fire glowed. The breathing of the family fell back into rhythm. This bifurcated sleep was not a flaw, it was a harmony, a surrender to the way the body wanted to rest, without resistance. It allowed for physical restoration, but also mental clarity. In the stillness of the midnight watch, Bjorn could reflect on the day's work, remember a dream, or say a quiet prayer to the gods. He would rise in a few hours to begin his daily tasks, splitting wood, feeding animals, carving planks for a new boat. But for now, he slept again, and as he did, the night itself seemed to exhale. The Viking night was not a wall of sleep, but a tapestry, woven with light and shadow, waking and dreaming, stillness and breath. And in that design, they found something we've lost, permission to rest the way nature intended. So if you find yourself waking in the dark, don't panic, don't reach for your screen, just breathe. Sit for a moment in the quiet, let your thoughts wander, let your body decide when it's ready for sleep again. Maybe what we call broken sleep is just the return of something ancient, something wise, something Viking. The wind howled low through the birch trees outside Astrid's longhouse. Snow pressed softly against the thick turf walls, muffling the world beyond. Inside, the fire in the hearth had been coaxed down to a quiet bed of glowing embers. The room was warm, but cloaked in a deep, complete darkness. Astrid sat cross-legged beside the hearth, a bundle of dry moss and twigs beside her. Her young daughter, Era, watched intently as Astrid slowly fed a few pieces of kindling into the fire, keeping the coals alive without flooding the room with light. "Never let the fire die completely," Astrid whispered, her voice low and steady. "But never let it take the night away either." Era nodded, her eyes reflecting the dim orange glow. This lesson wasn't just about warmth, it was about sleep, the kind of sleep that came when the body aligned with the darkness and the mind surrendered without resistance. In Viking homes like Astrid's, Darkness was not something to fear or conquer. It was natural, expected, even sacred. Unlike our modern bedrooms, where glowing clocks, LED indicators, and city lights sneak in through windows, Viking longhouses were void of light during sleep. And this absence of illumination did something extraordinary. It gave the body permission to rest. Modern science tells us that darkness triggers the release of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep cycles. Exposure to light, especially the blue light common in screens and LED bulbs, suppresses this process. But in Astrid's world, light came only from fire, warm red spectrum light that gently faded into darkness with the setting of the sun. Astrid added a pinch of dried herbs to the fire, a small tradition before bed. The scent of lavender and spruce drifted through the air, calming, grounding. Era yawned, her small body already responding to the deepening quiet. "Darkness is part of sleep, little one," Astrid said softly. "Not just the absence of light, but a place for the spirit to rest." She stood and moved across the longhouse, her steps soft on the wooden floor. Thick wool curtains had already been drawn across the small shuttered window. The only light now was the memory of the fire. The Vikings, living in the high latitudes of Scandinavia, were no strangers to seasonal extremes. In winter, days were short and nights stretched endlessly. But rather than resist this rhythm, they adapted. Long winter darkness allowed for extended sleep, and their homes were built to preserve it. At night, the long house became a cave of stillness. There were no lamps left burning, no candlelight flickering into the late hours. Candles and oil were precious and used sparingly. Fire was for heat and food, not for holding back the dark. Astrid settled onto the sleeping platform beside Era, pulling a fur over them both. The coals gave off just enough warmth to keep the chill away. There was no artificial glow to disrupt their rest, no blinking light on a ceiling, no hum of electricity in the walls. And because of this, their sleep came easily, deeply, naturally. Researchers today have studied the effects of total darkness on sleep, often with surprising results. In just a few days of living without artificial light, subjects begin to fall asleep earlier, sleep longer, and feel more rested. Melatonin levels increase, dreams become more vivid, and the body finds its way back to the rhythms it once knew. In the Viking world, this was simply life, a world where the sun dictated the day's activities, and the night called gently toward rest. Era's breathing slowed, becoming steady and soft. Astrid closed her eyes, her body settling into the comfort of familiar sounds. The crackle of the hearth, the wind pushing gently against the house, the faint rustle of wool against straw. This was more than sleep. It was a full reset, an immersion into darkness that allowed the body to heal, the mind to wander, and the soul to rest without interference. Back in modern homes, we fight the night. Night lights glow in children's rooms. Bathroom lights flood the senses at 2 a.m. Street lamps leak through blinds. Screens bathe our faces in cold, unnatural light, and we wonder why rest feels elusive. The Viking longhouse offers a simple but powerful counterpoint. Let the darkness in. Astrid would rise before dawn, as she always did, with the natural waking of her body. There would be no alarm clock to jolt her into wakefulness, no schedule to race against. The morning would begin with the relighting of the hearth, a warm drink, and the slow gathering of the day. But for now, in this moment, there was only stillness. No chatter, no distraction, no brightness, only sleep, nurtured by firelight and true darkness. As her breathing slowed to match her daughter's, Astrid let go of the day entirely. Her mind, unburdened by stimulation, drifted easily into dream. And outside the sky turned even darker as clouds rolled in, blanketing the stars. It was as if the land itself understood what the body needed. In that longhouse, in that blackness, there was no sense of missing anything, nothing left to do, nothing left to see, just the gentle descent into the kind of sleep that no modern light can replicate. Sleep not as a task, but as a return, sleep the Viking way. And so the night passed in silence and shadow, and the darkness did what it was always meant to do. It healed, it restored, it embraced. The wind rolled in from the western fjords, brushing the grassy roof of Gudrun's longhouse like a lullaby whispered by the land itself. The structure stood low and wide, cradled in snow-dusted hills near what is now Denmark. Thick turf covered the roof like a warm blanket, blending the home into the earth and protecting those within from the chill winds that often prowled the night. Inside all was still. Gudrun moved slowly through the central room, placing another fur over her son who had already drifted off near the hearth. The orange glow of the banked fire outlined the curve of the raised sleeping platform and caught the sheen of wooden beams overhead, hand-hewn, darkened by years of smoke and silence. This was no luxury dwelling, yet it was profoundly comfortable, not because of extravagance, but because every element, every timber, every stone, every stitch of wool had a purpose. Viking longhouses weren't just shelters, they were sanctuaries. Built with intuition, shaped by necessity and perfected by time, they became some of the most sleep-friendly environments ever created. No windows leaked harsh light into the night. The few that existed were small, shuttered, and covered with oiled cloth or animal membrane. Light could be let in when needed, but during the long winter months it was shut out entirely, letting darkness deepen like a weighted cloak across the room. The thick turf roof, insulated walls, and low ceiling helped to conserve heat and dampen sound. The cold stayed out, the warmth stayed in, the world outside and in was quiet. Gudrun's sleeping platform lined the far wall of the longhouse, made of oak planks raised slightly above the floor. It was wide enough for several to sleep side by side. The household, family, helpers, even visiting travellers, shared space during the harshest months. Body heat was not wasted here. It was a resource as important as firewood. She stepped onto the platform and lay down beside her husband, pulling their layered bedding over her shoulders. Beneath her was straw changed at the start of winter, clean, soft, and slightly fragrant. Above that, woolen cloth woven by her own hands. Atop it all, a heavy reindeer skin, warm even in the deepest night. Archaeological evidence tells us that Viking dwellings like Gudrun's were not accidental in their comfort. Every feature reflected an understanding of how people lived and slept within nature's rhythm. There were no distractions, no electric hums, no blaring devices, only wood, wool, and firelight. Modern homes, by contrast, are designed with sharp lines, isolated rooms, and glaring artificial lights. Windows leak light from passing cars. Walls insulate us from sound, but also from one another. Bedrooms glow with the soft blue haze of screens. In trying to perfect comfort, we've often strayed from what the body truly needs to rest. But in Gudrun's world, rest was not a struggle. It was a return. The longhouse was arranged with sleep in mind. Central hearth, shared warmth, minimal light. A family might all sleep within earshot, but the layered space created a sense of safety, of connection, and of stillness. During colder months, families like Gudrun's would retreat to these interior rhythms, not fighting the darkness, but adapting to it. Evening meant slowing down. Meals were eaten early, conversations softened, movement faded until the only sound left was the soft crackle of fire and the shifting of furs. The physical structure of Viking homes reinforced this nightly ritual. The ceilings were low, encouraging seated or lying postures. The fire pit in the centre emitted warmth, and cast flickering shadows that calmed rather than stimulated. And unlike the white ceilings of modern bedrooms that reflect and amplify light, the darkened wood of the longhouse ceiling absorbed it, encouraging rest. Even their construction materials played a role. Wood and turf breathed with the seasons, creating a microclimate that naturally regulated temperature and humidity. No sudden dry air from heating vents, no chill from tiled floors. Instead, the room held a gentle, even warmth. Gudrun reached up to adjust a woolen curtain hanging above the platform, one of the few concessions to privacy. It didn't seal off sound or space, but it marked a boundary, a signal that sleep had come. She turned onto her side, facing the fire as it dimmed. Her breath was steady, matched by the slow inhale and exhale of her household around her. Science now tells us that temperature, darkness, and silence are foundational to quality sleep. The Viking longhouse offered all three, but more than that, it offered connection to family, to the earth, to time itself. There were no clocks to chase, no schedules to force. Sleep arrived when it was ready, not when it was commanded. Outside, the snow continued to fall in slow spirals, collecting atop the grass-covered roof. Inside, the stillness deepened. The walls did not creak with stress or strain. The beams did not vibrate with distant traffic. The world was exactly as it should be, calm, quiet, dark. As Gudrun drifted towards sleep, she remembered a phrase her mother once whispered on nights like this: "The house sleeps with us, not around us." And it was true. The longhouse was not just shelter, it was part of the sleep itself. It gathered warmth, muffled sound, and held the darkness close. It made no demands. It simply allowed rest to happen. In that simple, seamless allowance, the Vikings found something most of us have forgotten. Sleep is not a task to perform, but a state to return to, not a puzzle to solve, but a place we once belonged. And Gudrun, wrapped in fur and family, surrendered to it easily, not with effort, but with trust. The coals in the hearth glowed low and steady, casting a faint orange hue against the walls of Thorvald's longhouse. Outside, the night was deep and still, the snow-covered ground shimmering under a pale moon. The world slept, but within these walls a subtle rhythm had begun once more. Thorvald opened his eyes slowly. His body felt rested, though the night was far from over. Beside him, his wife Freydis stirred gently, her breath rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Across the room, Astrid was already awake, her movements soft and practiced as she wrapped a shawl over her shoulders and moved toward the hearth. It was the time between sleeps. In the Viking world, this hour, what we today might call an inconvenient interruption, was a welcomed interlude, a quiet space between first and second sleep. Not a disruption, a ritual, an hour or two of calm activity, conversation or stillness before returning to slumber. This was the rhythm of the night, and it was understood, not resisted. Astrid crouched beside the hearth, her hands steady as she coaxed the fire back to life with dried moss and splinters. Sparks danced in the gloom. The fire brightened just enough to give warmth and light, but not enough to disturb the rest of the household. Thorvald sat up on his sleeping platform, adjusting the fur over his legs. He nodded silently to Astrid, who gave a slight smile in return. The others remained asleep, but this moment belonged to them, an hour carved out of the night, quiet and unhurried. Astrid reached for her wool basket and sat near the fire. Her hands began to work rhythmically, spinning thread from soft tufts of sheep's wool. The crackle of the fire and the soft whisper of the spindle were the only sounds. "Have you noticed the frost hasn't climbed as high on the beams this winter?" she said softly. Thorvald rubbed his beard and looked up at the rafters. The insula. Tion held better this year. I doubled the moss along the north wall. This kind of conversation, light, practical, reflective, was typical of the midnight hour. not burdened by urgency or complexity, just the kind of talk that eases the mind. In the far corner, one of the goats in the adjoining pen bleated softly. Thorvald rose and pulled on his boots, moving quietly past the sleeping children. He opened the wooden partition that separated the animals from the living space and checked the trough. Low on water, he muttered to himself. He carried a bucket from the storage corner and added melted snow from the warming barrel. The goat calmed and returned to its hay. Tasks like these, small and mindful, were common during this time. Waking in the dark was not a flaw in the sleep cycle, but a functional and spiritual pause. Across the Viking world, saga texts and archaeological findings suggest that these waking hours were often used for various quiet activities. Some sharpened tools, some prayed or whispered to ancestors, others shared a drink or engaged in intimacy. In every case, it was intentional, useful, and free from stress. Back at the hearth, Astrid reached for a leather pouch and added a few herbs to a clay mug of warm water, chamomile, valerian, a pinch of sweetgrass. She handed it to Thorvald as he sat beside her. "For your shoulder," she said. "You strained it with that oak beam yesterday." He accepted the drink and nodded in gratitude. The bitter herbs softened by honey soothed not only his body but his breath. The heat, the taste, the aroma, all grounded him in the moment. "It's strange," he said after a few sips. "This time of night, I feel more awake than I do at midday sometimes." Astrid smiled. "Because no one is pulling at your sleeve." There was truth in it. The pressure of the day, the chores, the decisions, the noise, had all fallen away. This hour belonged to them, not to the world. Ira, Astrid's daughter, stirred lightly in her sleep. Astrid looked over but didn't move. The child, like most children, sometimes drifted awake during this hour and then back to sleep just as easily. The hush in the longhouse felt sacred, as if the world were holding its breath. Researchers now recognize this pattern, called biphasic sleep, as a common practice in pre-industrial societies across the world. Waking briefly in the middle of the night was once considered completely normal, perhaps even optimal. But the coming of artificial lighting and rigid work schedules turned that natural rhythm into something to be feared or fixed. For Vikings like Thorvald and Astrid, there was no fear in waking, no shame, no rushing back to sleep with clenched fists and anxious thoughts. They allowed the body to follow its own lead. After a while, Thorvald placed his mug down, now empty. The fire was steady, the room warm. He looked toward the sleeping platform, now beckoning once again. "Time to return," he said softly. Astrid nodded and set down her spindle. She gathered the wool, folded her shawl, and stood slowly. They moved back to their beds without words. Freydis shifted in her sleep. Sensing Thorvald's warmth return, he pulled the fur up around them both. And then sleep returned. No clock tick. No alarm waited. The fire's glow softened once more into a gentle orange pulse. Outside, the wind shifted through the trees. Inside, the longhouse quieted again. The rhythm of the night, unbroken, carried on. The waking hours between were not an error. They were an invitation, a soft doorway between the two worlds of rest. And in them, Vikings found something we've nearly lost, a moment that belongs to no one else but the self. As the fire dimmed and their breathing slowed, Astrid and Thorvald drifted once more into the deep, easy sleep of the second rest, wrapped in wool and silence. The night once again was whole. The wind rattled gently at the wooden shutters of Gudrun's longhouse. Outside, the night was cold and quiet, the moon casting a silver sheen across the snow-covered fields. But inside, the home was warm with breath and presence. The fire at the center of the room glowed low, its flickering light illuminating faces in sleep, limbs tangled in furs, and the soft rise and fall of chests breathing in unison. Gudrun lay nestled between her youngest daughter and her sister's son, who had joined them for the winter season. Beyond them, her husband lay nearest the hearth with his aging father beside him, and on the far end of the platform, their oldest child curled around the family dog. The entire household slept together on a long wooden platform lined with straw and wool, wrapped in layers of fur. There were no bedrooms here, no locked doors, no separate quarters. This was communal sleep, and it was as normal as the rising of the sun. In the Viking Age, homes were not designed to separate individuals, but to unite them. Space was shared, warmth was shared, time was shared, and in this shared space something profound occurred each night. Safety, trust, and rest took root not in solitude, but in togetherness. For Gudrun, the arrangement was not a compromise, it was a comfort. Her children sleeping soundly beside her rarely woke from nightmares. The baby, if stirred, could be quickly soothed without rising. If the wind picked up, if a noise was heard outside, someone in the household would always awaken. There was no fear of the night. There was company in every breath. Archaeological excavations across Scandinavia and beyond have revealed the layouts of Viking longhouses. Central hearths, raised sleeping benches along the walls, and few internal divisions. Even among wealthier families, private rooms were rare. Space was open, life was communal, and sleep was a shared expert. This way of life provided more than warmth in cold climates. It fostered a deep sense of security, emotional and physical. In a time when dangers could come silently through the forest, the sound of multiple people breathing, shifting, and watching made any would-be intruder think twice. But beyond protection, this style of sleeping created something gentler, an atmosphere of belonging. Children felt it first. Growing up in constant closeness to parents and siblings, they were never left to face darkness alone. Anxiety had little place to take hold. A comforting hand was always within reach. A lullaby, a whispered story, or the simple rhythm of a parent's breathing could lull even the most restless child to sleep. Even adults, weary from work or travel, found peace in this closeness. Conversations would often trail into the night, soft and slow. Thoughts were shared in the dark, dreams spoken aloud. The line between day and night blurred in warmth and connection. Gudrun remembered, as a girl, lying awake some nights listening to her grandmother hum. The tune was always the same, a song older than memory, softer than sleep. She didn't always drift off quickly, but she never felt alone. Now, with children of her own, Gudrun carried the same tradition, a song in the dark, a hand on a shoulder, and the quiet understanding that no one slept apart. Today, we prize privacy. We build walls, we sleep in separate rooms, in separate beds, in houses filled with locks and alarms. But many now struggle to sleep at all. We lie awake, feeling isolated. We chase silence, only to find it echoing with our own thoughts. Science now tells us what Gudrun always knew, that humans are wired for co-regulation. Our nervous systems calm when we are near those we trust. Our breathing sinks, our heart rate slows, anxiety softens. Communal sleeping, once seen as primitive, is now being reconsidered for its psychological and physiological benefits. Of course, communal sleeping was not without its challenges. There were snorers, restless sleepers, and the occasional toddler's elbow to the ribs. But these were minor inconveniences compared to the deep sense of safety and connection it provided. Even intimacy had its place. Couples found quiet corners or waited for the late hours when others had drifted fully into rest. The Viking world was not shy about the realities of life. It simply folded them into its rhythms. In Gudrun's longhouse, small rituals helped maintain peace. Shoes were removed. Talking was soft. Blankets and furs were shared, not hoarded. If someone woke in the night, as often happened, they did so quietly, often tending the fire or checking on animals before returning to sleep. And in the morning, the room would come alive slowly. Stretching limbs, shared yawns, quiet murmurs. The fire would be stirred, porridge warmed. Children rubbed their eyes and reached instinctively for familiar hands. This daily cycle, shared sleep, shared waking, wove the household together like thread through wool. There was no question of trust, no need to guard oneself. They slept as they lived, together. Gudrun turned slightly, adjusting her daughter's blanket and brushing a strand of hair from her brow. The child didn't stir, already deep in dream. The warmth of her family pressed gently against her back. The fire whispered its lullaby. She closed her eyes and let herself drift. This was sleep, not as escape, but as embrace, not in silence, but in the soft chorus of others breathing beside her. In the Viking world, sleep was not something one did alone. It was part of the family rhythm, the tribe's song, the village's pulse, and in that closeness, night after night, they found something we now chase in isolation, peace. Not behind a door, but beside one another. And so, as the fire faded and the longhouse settled once more, into darkness, Gudrun slept, wrapped in warmth, memory and belonging. The night held them all, gently and without fear. The first frost had settled across the valley like a silver net, blanketing Bjorn's farm with a shimmer that crunched underfoot. The cold had arrived early that year. Breath came out in clouds, and the goats huddled close in their shelter. Inside the longhouse, however, the work had begun, not with fire or food, but with bedding. Bjorn stood at the edge of the sleeping platform, lifting bundles of clean, dry straw into place. His son, Leif, dragged a sack of wool scraps across the floor, its coarse linen brushing over the wood. They worked in practiced silence, layering the foundations for the long winter ahead. It was bedding day. Every year, just before the cold set in, Viking families would prepare their beds with care and intention. This wasn't a matter of decoration or comfort in the modern sense. It was about function, warmth, and health. And though it may seem primitive to our eyes, these beds, crafted from straw, wool, and fur, were strikingly effective. Bjorn began with the straw. Dried stalks of barley and wheat collected from the harvest were spread evenly across the wooden platform. It formed a thick, breathable cushion that lifted the body off the cold planks and allowed air to circulate. In the damp climate of Scandinavia, this airflow was crucial. A poorly ventilated bed could grow mould, draw moisture, or chill the bones through the night. Not too tight, Bjorn reminded his son as Leif fluffed a corner. Let the air move, or you'll feel it in your back by morning. Next came the wool. Woven from the sheep they'd raised and sheared in summer, the thick fabric served as both insulation and padding. It absorbed moisture, retained warmth, and softened the rustle of straw beneath. In winter, wool was everywhere, clothing, cloaks, bedding. It was the Vikings' greatest defence against the cold, and it was layered generously across the bed. Leif reached for the fod. Inal piece, the fur. A large reindeer skin, tanned and worn smooth with time, was laid gently across the top. Its dense hide would trap heat and shield against draughts. Bjorn smoothed it down with a hand and nodded, satisfied. The bed was ready. Though humble in material, Viking bedding followed an intuitive form of ergonomics, one that modern sleep scientists now recognize. Unlike today's mattresses, which often emphasize softness or support through synthetic foams and springs, Viking beds worked with natural elements that supported posture, regulated temperature, and aligned the body during sleep. Straw, for example, allowed the spine to rest with a balance of firmness and give. Wool adjusted to body temperature, keeping sleepers warm without overheating. Furs created a barrier against cold air, while also adding a weight that calmed the nervous system, a principle now echoed in the popularity of weighted blankets. Bjorn leaned back against the wall, resting for a moment. The room was dim, but the smell of fresh straw and lanolin-rich wool filled the air. It was a scent of preparation, of winter's rhythm beginning. His wife, Inga, entered with a small bundle of dried herbs, lavender and yarrow, and tucked it beneath the bedding at the head of the platform. "For dreaming," she said with a small smile. Bjorn nodded. They didn't need scented sprays or sleep apps. The herbs, the fire, the structure of the bed itself, all of it guided the body into rest. As night fell and the family gathered on the bedding, there was no tossing or adjustment, no complaints about softness or springs. The layers, straw, wool, fur, held the warmth of the day and the safety of routine. The children snuggled in, bodies close, and the adults settled beside them. And then came sleep, quiet, uninterrupted, complete. In today's world, many struggle to find that kind of rest. We chase sleep through orthopedic pillows, gel mattresses, and airflow-regulated toppers. We elevate legs, flip mattresses, consult experts. And yet, the simplicity of Viking bedding reminds us that natural materials, carefully chosen and maintained, often serve us better than the most engineered solutions. Researchers studying historical sleep environments have found that bedding made from organic fibers like straw and wool promotes deeper, more restorative sleep. These materials respond to the body in ways synthetic substances can't. They breathe, they adjust, they age gracefully, and they require presence. Bjorn and his family didn't replace their beds with a click. They prepared them by hand. They gathered the straw, they aired the wool, they stitched the seams and folded the furs. Each step was a ritual of care, connecting body, home, and season. In a world without thermostats or memory foam, sleep came not through control, but through trust. Trust in materials, trust in routine, trust in the body's ability to rest when given the right space. As the fire dimmed and the longhouse quieted, Bjorn pulled the fur up around his shoulders. The straw rustled softly beneath him. Leaf shifted in his sleep, pressing closer to the warmth. Outside, the frost thickened. Inside, the warmth held. And beneath layers born of earth and season, they slept. Not perfectly, but completely. The Viking bed was never about luxury. It was about alignment with the body, the land, and the season. And perhaps in peeling back the layers of those old beds, we uncover something we've buried beneath coils and foam, that comfort isn't bought, it's built, layer by layer, night by night. The Viking diet circadian rhythm. In the final hour of daylight, as the sun dipped low over the western fjords, Thorvald stood near the hearth, preparing the evening meal. The longhouse smelled of salt and smoke, of herbs crushed under stone and fresh barley ground to flour. Outside, the sea wind curled against the turf walls, but inside all was warm, calm, and still. Tonight's supper was simple: smoked herring, boiled barley, fermented goat's milk, and a few root vegetables pulled from the cool storage pit. There were no spices from distant lands, no sugars or sauces, just food from the earth, sea, and season. Thorvald stirred the pot slowly, watching the barley thicken. Freydis, his wife, prepared the bowls and broke dark rye bread into portions for each member of the family. Their children, worn from the day's tasks, sat quietly nearby, the flicker of firelight dancing in their tired eyes. This was more than a meal. It was a ritual of slowing down, of grounding, and it mattered more than they knew. In the Viking world, food was never separated from rhythm, of the day, the season, the body. Meals were taken earlier in the evening, hours before sleep. Heavy, sugary foods were absent. Fermentation, natural fats, protein, and fiber formed the basis of their diet, and though they didn't know the word, they lived by what we now call circadian alignment. Thorvald ladled steaming stew into each bowl. The fish, rich in omega-3 fatty acids, had been caught that morning and smoked gently over alderwood. The barley, with its slow-burning carbohydrates, would keep hunger away through the night. The fermented milk, slightly sour and thick, was filled with beneficial bacteria that calmed the gut and soothed the body. Freydis offered thanks in a quiet voice, an old custom, part gratitude, part remembrance, and they ate, not quickly, not distracted, but together. Modern research now confirms what the Vikings practiced intuitively. Food timing, content, and quality have a profound impact on sleep. Heavy or sugar-rich meals close to bedtime disrupt digestion and delay the onset of sleep. Spikes in blood sugar create restlessness. Processed ingredients confuse the body's natural cycles. But the Viking diet avoided all of this, not out of discipline, but by design. Their world didn't offer choices between processed and whole foods. Everything was whole. Everything came from somewhere nearby. What grew in the earth was eaten. What swam in the rivers was cooked. What fermented naturally was consumed with reverence. After the meal, Thorvald passed around a small wooden bowl of preserved berries, black currants and lingonberries dried in the sun and soaked in warm water. Naturally tart, low in sugar, and packed with antioxidants, they satisfied the taste for something sweet without jarring the body. Once the bowls were cleaned and stacked, the family moved away from the hearth, their bodies slowing further with the fading light. There was no late-night snacking, no second meal, no sudden bursts of energy. The meal had nourished them, not stimulated them. It told the body gently and clearly, it is time to rest. Freydis rubbed her pregnant belly and smiled. She kicks less after we eat barley, she whispered to Thorvald. He chuckled, resting his hand there for a moment. She knows it's time to sleep. Unknowingly, their daughter was already tuned to the rhythm of the house. The rhythm of day and night, light and dark, work and rest. The hearth dimmed. The fire was banked with ash. The children crawled beneath the furs. Thorvald wrapped his cloak around his shoulders and stretched out beside them. His body was full but not heavy, fed but not taxed. The sleep that would come would be untroubled. Modern studies show that the gut and brain are deeply connected, and what we eat affects our ability to fall and stay asleep. Foods rich in tryptophan, magnesium, calcium, and healthy fats support the production of melatonin and serotonin. The Viking diet, naturally abundant in these nutrients, was a nightly prescription for rest. Smoked fish provided tryptophan and healthy fats. Barley, rich in magnesium, helped muscles relax. Fermented dairy balanced gut bacteria and supported digestion. Herbs like chamomile and yarrow, often steeped as post-meal teas, acted as gentle sedatives. And timing, perhaps most critical, ensured that digestion was nearly complete by the time they lay down. The body wasn't working through the night. It was ready to restore, not digest. In our modern world, where food is often eaten hurriedly and at odd hours, we've lost this harmony. Late dinners, processed snacks, and caffeine-fueled evenings throw the body into confusion. We ask it to wind down while keeping it stimulated. But Thorvald's family knew no such contradiction. They lived by the fire, by the fields, by the rhythms they felt in their bones, and when the last light dimmed, when the fire gave its final glow, there was no resistance, only sleep. As Thorvald drifted off, he remembered the day's labour, the repairing of nets, the repairing of fence posts, the smell of the sea and the call of gulls overhead. He remembered the taste of the fish, the warmth of the barley, the comfort of the shared bowl. His body was calm, his breath deep. He did not wake hungry. He did not wake at all, until the sky began to pale again over the fjords. The Viking diet wasn't a trend or philosophy, it was life, and in it they found not just strength for the day, but peace for the night. A peace that began not in the bed, but in the bowl. The last light had faded behind the pines as Astrid sat cross-legged near the hearth, her hands working slowly, methodically. A woven basket lay open beside her, its contents a carefully arranged collection of dried leaves, roots, and flowers. The scent of crushed herbs mingled with smoke, earthy and familiar. The longhouse was dim now, the fire reduced to a warm bed of embers, and most of the household was settling into quiet. But Astrid had one more task before sleep. Her son, Eric, had been restless for several nights. A growing boy, all energy and imagination, he often stirred in his sleep or awoke with dreams he couldn't explain. Tonight, Astrid prepared something special for him, a night brew made from the herbs she'd gathered over the summer and dried in the rafters. She reached first for valerian root, crumbling a small piece into the wooden mortar. Its scent was strong, earthy, and slightly sweet. A powerful sedative in the right amount, valerian was her oldest ally for sleep. Next came hops, dried cones from the wild vines that grew near the riverbank. Not just for brewing ale, hops calmed the body and mind when steeped alone. She added chamomile blossoms, golden and fragrant, then a pinch of lavender for scent, a small curl of willow bark for pain, and finally sweetgrass to soften the flavour and bring peace. As she ground the herbs with a smooth river stone, the soft rhythm of the motion seemed to echo the heartbeat of the house, steady, slow, prepared for rest. Modern sleep science would one day validate what Astrid practiced by feel and memory. Valerian root, now studied for its sedative properties, is known to ease insomnia and reduce the time it takes to fall asleep. Hops contain compounds that interact with the body's natural circadian rhythm. Chamomile, long revered as a calming agent, has measurable effects on reducing anxiety and promoting deeper sleep. But Astrid didn't know the names of neurotransmitters or sleep cycles. She knew the body, she knew the land, and she knew how to listen. A clay pot of water warmed near the fire, not boiling but hot enough to draw the medicine from the herbs. She poured the crushed mixture into a linen sachet and dropped it into the pot, watching the colour bloom slowly in the water, gold, brown, green, and deep amber blending together. As it steeped, she turned to Eric, who sat wrapped in a fur near the fire, blinking slowly. "I'm not tired," he whispered. Astrid smiled. "That's good. This isn't to make you sleep. It's to help you rest." He watched her pour the tea into a carved wooden cup. The scent was rich and unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. He sipped carefully. "Bitter," he said. "That means it's working." He chuckled softly and leaned against her side. Astrid stroked his hair, her hand moving slowly with the rhythm of his breath. Long before sleep became something we chased with pills or blue screens, it was a state nurtured gently by hands like Astrid's. Herbal knowledge was passed down not through textbooks, but by memory, practice, and the intimate experience of seasons. Some herbs were burned. She would sometimes toss a handful of dried mugwort or juniper onto the fire, letting the smoke fill the room before sleep. These scents, known to calm and ground, would drift into the fabric of the longhouse. Inhaling them became part of the ritual: breath, scent, stillness. Others were kept in sachets near the bedding: lavender, sweetgrass, or dried apple blossoms. Their aroma lingered through the night, gentle reminders to the body that it was safe, that it was time to let go. Astrid reached for another bundle, this one filled with sage and thyme, which she tied tightly and hung above the fire to dry further. Her apothecary was simple: bundles tied with twine, labelled with hand-carved runes, stored in linen, bone, and clay, and yet within it she held the wisdom of centuries. Today we speak of sleep hygiene, circadian health, melatonin levels. We measure and track and analyze. But Astrid's world was guided by a more intuitive science, one where sleep was not fought for, but allowed. Eric finished his tea and yawned. Astrid wrapped a small sachet of crushed lavender in wool and tucked it into the furs beside his pillow. "This will help keep your dreams kind," she said. He smiled and curled into the warmth, already halfway to sleep. Astrid watched him for a long moment, her heart easing with the quiet of his breath. She added another log to the fire, adjusted the herbs above it, and finally made her own cup of tea. She chose something lighter for herself, just chamomile, linden flower, and a touch of mint. She sipped slowly, her body already unwinding. Her eyes scanned the room, her family sleeping or nearly so, the shadows on the wall, the fire's glow, the herbs, the quiet. Everything was in its place. Everything was ready for sleep, and so she lay down. The cup was empty, the hearth was low, the child was resting, and the night held them gently, as it always did. In the modern world, we often forget how much the body responds to ritual, rhythm, and nature's pharmacy. Astrid never did. Her toolkit was made of plants and patience, fire and breath, and in her hands, the ancient art of rest continued, night after night. Sleep, for her, was not a mystery. It was a preparation, a surrender, a gift. And with her final breath before sleep, Astrid whispered an old word, one passed from mother to daughter for generations, Sofna, to fall asleep. Gunnar hauled the last beam into place as the sun dipped behind the pines, staining the sky in streaks of fire and ash. His hands were raw, his back sore, his boots heavy with mud and sawdust. But in his chest, beneath the fatigue, there was a satisfaction that had no name, the kind that settles deep in the bones. Thorvald stood nearby, wiping his brow with a cloth soaked in seawater. The two had spent the day hauling timber from the edge of the forest to the shoreline, where a new boat was taking shape. The hull was nearly finished now, its ribs curved and strong, each one shaped by hand and eye, not measurement. "That'll hold," Thorvald said, patting the beam. Gunnar nodded, too tired for words. As they walked back toward the longhouse, twilight clinging to their shoulders, the air was cool and clean. The smell of pine still clung to Gunnar's tunic, and his muscles ached in a way that promised sleep would not just come, but come deeply. Inside, Freydis had already stirred the evening stew, barley and cabbage, salted fish, and the last of the autumn carrots. Simple fare, but warm and grounding. The fire glowed in the hearth, casting a gentle flicker over the tired figures entering one by one. Gunnar ate in silence, spoon in hand, his body quieting more with every bite. After the meal, he cleaned his hands, rolled out his sleeping mat near the fire, and lay down without ceremony. He didn't need a ritual. The day itself had been the ritual. In the Viking world, physical labor wasn't a novelty. It was a constant. Whether rowing across choppy fjords, tending sheep in the cold rain, splitting wood, hauling nets, or mending sails, the body was in near constant motion. This wasn't exhaustion as we know it, burnout from endless noise and digital overstimulation. It was a natural fatigue, the kind that follows effort with purpose. Gunnar's work wasn't just productive, it was physical, in a way that modern life often lacks. His body had spent the day lifting, pulling, balancing, climbing, stretching, muscles engaged, heart rate elevated, fresh air in his lungs, the land beneath his feet. He did not count steps. He did not track macros. He did not measure performance. He just worked, and when it was done, he slept. Modern science tells us what Gunnar never needed to learn. Physical exertion promotes deeper sleep. Studies show that people who engage in sustained, moderate-intensity activity during the day fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and spend more time in slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most restorative stage. But unlike the sudden spike of activity at a gym, Viking labor was woven into the rhythm of the day. It was purposeful. It had meaning. Gunnar shifted in his sleep, the fur over his chest rising and falling. The fire dimmed slowly beside him. Around the longhouse others had joined him in rest. Thorvald, Freydis, even little Eric curled beside his sister. There was no midnight panic, no restlessness, no racing thoughts. Gunnar's body was spent, his mind was clear. The day had left no energy behind to waste on worry. In the modern world, we often confuse mental exhaustion with physical fatigue. We sit for hours, stare at screens, juggle decisions, absorb news and noise, and yet our bodies are still. At night, our minds spin, and sleep feels distant. But in Gunnar's world, the mind and body moved together. The strain of effort burned through stress. The breath of fresh air stilled the heart. By nightfall, there was no energy left to fuel anxiety. And so, sleep came. Heavy, instant, restorative. Gunnar didn't wake until dawn, when the rooster called and the chill of early morning kissed his cheeks. He stirred, stretched slowly, and sat up. The ache in his arms was real, but it wasn't a burden. It was the echo of usefulness. Thorvald was already stoking the fire. "We'll finish the prow today," he said. Gunnar stood and reached for his cloak, already thinking ahead to the sound of the adze on wood, the swing of the hammer, the feel of oak beneath his palms. He welcomed it. Physical labor in the Viking world wasn't something to be escaped. It was woven into life, into identity, and its reward wasn't just food or fire or completion, it was sleep. Today we've tried to replicate this in controlled environments, standing desks, step counters, treadmill desks, but something vital is missing: purpose. Our bodies crave motion, yes, but they also crave meaning. Gunnar didn't lift weights, he lifted the bones of a boat. He didn't jog in place, he ran to herd sheep before the rain. By day's end, his work had shape, substance, and story, and when he lay down, that story ended in silence. No thoughts kept him awake, no screens waited for his eyes. Just the fire, just the dark, just the weight of a body well used. As Gunnar pulled the fur tighter around his shoulders and drifted off again the next night, he thought briefly of the boat, of the prow, of the curve that still needed shaping, and then he slept, not from exhaustion, but from fulfillment, a rest not forced but earned. The moon was high over the Danish hills, as Gudrun lay on her side beneath the thick firs of the longhouse. The fire had faded to a soft, pulsing glow, its light barely reaching the low-beamed ceiling. The air was cool, her body still, but her mind gently awake, floating in that quiet space between thought and dream. Around her the others slept. The children's breath was soft and rhythmic. Her husband let out a gentle snore now and then. Even the dog stirred only when the wind nudged at the door. It was a night like many others, calm, steady, undisturbed. And yet Gudrun did not force sleep to come. She did not count backward or adjust her posture or worry about the hours remaining before morning. She simply rested. This, perhaps, was one of the Vikings' greatest gifts, a mind at ease with rest. Unlike our modern world, where sleep is often approached like a problem to solve, Gudrun's people embraced it as a natural return. They did not obsess over bedtime routines or battle insomnia with glowing screens and sleepless scrolling. There was no shame in being awake at night, no fear of being tired the next day. They trusted the rhythm of body and mind, and that trust itself created peace. The Norse worldview shaped this peace profoundly. Life was hard, yes, unpredictable, yes, but the Vikings did not see anxiety as something to wrestle with in the dark. They viewed the night not as a threat, but as a passage. Gudrun turned slightly, her hand resting on her belly. She had worked hard that day, mending garments, preparing dried meat for storage, weaving new wool into her daughter's winter tunic. Her conscience was quiet. She had done her part. There was nothing to prove. In Viking culture, honor and acceptance stood as pillars of mental resilience. One did what was needed, gave what one could, and accepted what came. It was a mindset steeped in the belief that worry over the uncontrollable was not only unhelpful, but unworthy of energy. Norse poetry often reflected this sentiment. Gudrun remembered one of her father's favourite verses from the Havamal. Cattle die, and kinsmen die, you yourself will die, but fair fame never dies, if you win it well. This verse, like many others, reminded its listeners of impermanence, not to frighten, but to free. Death would come, loss would come, but a good life, a life of action and honour, brought peace, even in sleep. Today our culture teaches us to strive endlessly, to optimize every moment, including our rest. We measure REM cycles with apps, monitor breathing patterns, track sleep debt, but the Viking mind knew nothing of this, and yet they slept deeply. Why? Because they were not mentally tangled when they laid their heads down. There were no emails unanswered, no screens alight with other people's lives, no endless comparisons or late-night doubts. They did not carry the weight of overchoice, of infinite options and digital noise. Their world was simpler, not easy, but clear. Gudrun yawned softly and let her eyes close. She did not fight for control over her sleep. She simply let go, and that release was the doorway. Modern psychologists speak of the paradox of sleep. The more we try to control it, the more it eludes us. Anxiety about not sleeping creates the very conditions that prevent it. But Gudrun's world lacked that paradox entirely. She did not chase sleep, she welcomed it. Some nights she drifted off quickly. Other nights she lingered in wakefulness, but never with worry. That gentle hour of semi-wakefulness, that space of thought and reflection was not a threat. It was a place to breathe, a place to let the day settle. She thought of her mother's voice singing softly when she was young, of her grandmother's stories told by firelight, of the way the wind sighed through the hills like a lullaby. These were the sounds that shaped her sense of safety, not sirens or alarms or late-night news. Even in times of grief or uncertainty, Viking sleep was not marked by sleepless torment. They mourned, but they did not ruminate endlessly. They prepared, but they did not catastrophize. They accepted the night as they accepted life, with eyes open, hands ready, heart still. Gudrun let her mind drift to tomorrow. There was wool to sort, roots to dry. The storm might come early, or not at all. Either way, she would meet it then, not now. And so she breathed. The fire shifted, sending a slow shadow along the wall. Someone turned in their sleep. The air was warm and quiet. Gudrun smiled faintly and sank deeper into the furs. No fear, no frenzy, just rest. Not because she had found the perfect condition for it, or sleep, but because she had found peace with the imperfection. In our world, anxiety robs us of rest. We fear fatigue. We fear not performing. We dread the sound of the alarm before we've even closed our eyes. But perhaps what we need isn't more control. Perhaps what we need is Gudrun's mind. A mind that worked hard when the sun was up and let go when it wasn't. A mind that knew there would always be another storm, and always, too, another morning. And so Gudrun slept, not from exhaustion and not from escape, but from the simple truth that she had done what was needed, and the rest, like the night, could be trusted to take care of itself. The longhouse was quiet, save for the occasional creak of timber or the shifting of wind against the turf roof. Outside, the moon hung low and full, casting its pale light over the snow-laced fields. Inside, Bjorn stirred in his sleep. He was deep in dream. In the world of the Vikings, dreams were not dismissed as mere imaginings. They were portals, glimpses into the will of the gods, messages from ancestors, signs of fate moving in the unseen world. To dream was not to escape reality, but to stand briefly in its hidden layers. Bjorn had not dreamed in many nights, but now he found himself walking through a forest he had never seen, yet somehow recognized. The trees swayed, though no wind touched them. A wolf passed silently across his path, its eyes like polished amber, and ahead, by a frozen stream, stood his late grandfather, cloaked in furs, silent and still. The old man raised one hand and pointed, not with urgency but with certainty, toward a narrow trail veiled by frost. Bjorn stepped toward it, but before he reached its mouth, he woke. The fire had dimmed to embers. His family still slept, but his heart was beating fast, and the air felt charged. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. The dream stayed with him, sharp and strange, heavy with meaning. In Viking tradition, this would not be dismissed. It would be remembered, interpreted, honoured. Bjorn stood and reached for the small pouch of charms that hung by the wall. Inside were items passed down from his mother, a piece of boar tusk for strength, a knot of horsehair for guidance, and a rune-carved stone for protection during sleep. These were not superstitions. They were tools for spiritual connection, worn close to the body, especially at night. He stepped outside briefly into the cold, breathing in the sharp air beneath the watchful moon. It was believed that dreams held more weight when the moon was full, that too, God spoke more clearly under its light. In Norse belief, dreams could be sent by the Norns, 3 mystical figures who wove the fates of gods and men. They spun the threads of life, past, present, and future. To see something in a dream, especially something vivid, was to catch a glimpse of their weaving. Bjorn looked up at the stars. Was the path in the dream real? Would he find it in the waking world? Was it symbolic of a decision to come, a danger, or an invitation? He would speak to Astrid tomorrow. She had knowledge of herbs and healing, but also of signs and symbols. Her mother had been a dream reader, and some of that gift lived in her still. He returned inside, warmed his hands near the fire, and lay down again. The dream was still alive in his mind, but not troubling, only important. Nearby, his wife breathed deeply, undisturbed. The children slept in peaceful knots of limbs and fur. He could hear the faint whistle of the dog's breath. Before he closed his eyes, he murmured a short prayer, not a plea, but a promise. May I remember what was shown. May I walk with open eyes. Sleep returned. Across Viking society, night was not only for rest, but for communion. Before sleep, many whispered short blessings or sang lullabies that asked for protection, not just from physical danger, but from troubled dreams. One old verse said, "Let not dark dreams find me. Let no spirit bind me. May the gods around me keep as I travel through this sleep." These words were simple, but they reflected a belief that sleep was a journey, and not always a safe one. Protective amulets were kept under pillows. Runes for clarity or calm were carved into wooden charms or traced into the air before sleep. Even the structure of the longhouse, its orientation, the positioning of the hearth, was said to align with elemental forces that kept the night's energy in balance. Modern dream psychology, while rooted in different language, affirms many of these beliefs. Dreams are now understood as processes of emotional processing, memory consolidation, and subconscious sorting. Vivid dreams often correlate with periods of stress, decision-making, or inner transformation. In cultures that honored dreams, people felt empowered to act upon them. Bjorn's dream, strange as it was, would guide his next days. Perhaps it would lead him to a new trade route, a decision about planting in spring, or a conversation long delayed. But he would not ignore it. He would listen, and in doing so he would stay aligned, not only with the gods, but with himself. As dawn crept slowly across the sky, light returned to the longhouse. Bjorn rose early and wrapped his cloak tightly around his shoulders. He stepped outside once more, not to chase a vision, but to greet it. The wind carried the scent of pine and sea. Somewhere beyond the hills, the trail from his dream might lie. But more than that, the dream had stirred something within him, a readiness, and so he began his day. In the Viking world, night was sacred, not just a place of silence, but of guidance, not a retreat, but a revelation. To sleep was to listen, to dream was to remember, and to rise was to follow. Bjorn would walk the path in time. For now, he would hold the dream like firelight in his chest, bright, flickering, and full of meaning. The first true snow came before the solstice, falling thick and heavy across the fjords. It blanketed the valley in silence, coating rooftops, burying paths, and softening every edge. For Thorvald and his family, this marked not just a change in weather, but a change in rhythm. Winter had arrived. The longhouse, once a passageway between outside chores and evening rest, became the world itself. With the sun rising late and setting early, if at all, the family moved according to the light of the hearth and the quiet pull of their bodies. Time slowed. The urgency of harvest and building gave way to stillness, and with the stillness came sleep. Thorvald stretched as he sat by the fire, his shoulders sore from splitting the last of the firewood. The heat from the hearth warmed his face, while the rest of the room settled in shadows. Freydis stirred a pot of stew as the children nestled together on the sleeping platform, already wrapped in wool. The light outside had faded hours ago, though it was only early evening. "We'll have more snow by morning," Freydis said, glancing toward the shuttered window. Thorvald nodded. "Let it come. We've enough. Enough food, enough firewood, enough wool, enough company." The Vikings didn't resist winter. They welcomed it as a natural pause. In these northern latitudes, the darkness stretched for weeks, but rather than battling the season, people like Thorvald surrendered to it. They didn't try to hold on to summer's pace. They didn't fill the dark with artificial light or push against fatigue. They rested. Modern science would later call this behavior seasonal adaptation, where humans, like animals, shift their metabolic and psychological patterns in response to light cycles. In winter, melatonin production naturally increases. The body craves more sleep, more slowness, more warmth. And in Viking homes, that craving was honoured. The longhouse became a cocoon. Thick layers of straw and wool lined the sleeping platform. Furs were laid out early in the evening. Small tasks, carving, mending, weaving, were done by firelight, often in silence or to the soft hum of story and song. In the heart of the dark season, sleep stretched. People would drift to bed soon after the evening meal, wake briefly in the middle of the night, then return to slumber until the morning, if the term morning even applied. It was not uncommon for families to rest a dozen hours each night, broken gently by quiet wakefulness. Children, freed from structured routines, learned to move with the seasons. They woke when their bodies told them. They listened to stories, played near the fire, and napped in warm corners without reprimand. There was no rush to rise, no schedule to meet. The Viking calendar marked this season not just with endurance, but with celebration. Yule, Jol, was the festival of midwinter. Families gathered, food was shared, and fires were kept burning for days. In Thorvald's longhouse, the Yule log had already been set aside, a thick piece of pine to burn through the darkest nights. With the long sleep came long dreams, and the storytelling followed. Thorvald's youngest, Eric, asked each night for one more tale, of Odin riding Sleipnir through the sky, of wolves chasing the sun, of old kings turned to starlight. These stories were not distractions. They were anchors, keeping the family grounded in the myth and meaning of their place in the world. Social warmth, too, replaced the warmth lost to weather. The longhouse wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a place to gather. Multiple families often shared the same space during winter months. Neighbours, cousins, elders who no longer farmed. In the dark season, loneliness had no place. The hearth was for everyone. In today's world, winter is often met with resistance. Artificial lights extend the day, heating systems remove the cold, productivity remains constant, but the Viking way suggests another path, one of alignment rather than opposition, to sleep more, to speak less, to gather closer, to honour the body's call for quiet. As the wind picked up outside, the walls of the longhouse creaked gently. Freydis passed warm cups of spiced milk around the fire. Astrid, visiting for the week, added a pinch of dried herbs to each, chamomile, sage, and crushed rose hips. "It helps with dreaming," she said, handing a cup to Thorvald. He took it gratefully. His body felt heavy, ready for rest. The conversation drifted into low tones. Eric nodded off mid-sentence. Freydis carried him to the bedding, laying him gently beneath the thickest furs. And one by one the others followed. No ceremony, no fight, just a quiet surrender to the night. Outside, snow fell softly. Inside, the longhouse breathed. The Vikings did not fear the dark season. They embraced it as a time of restoration, of intimacy, of slow renewal. And in doing so, they slept more deeply, dreamed more vividly, and awoke, when the time came, with the strength of those who had truly rested. Thorvald's eyes closed. The fire hissed low, the wind sang through the trees, and the long night continued, as it always had, a gift not to be endured, but to be welcomed. There was a time when sleep followed the sun, when firelight faded into starlight, and starlight gave way to dream. When people like Thorvald, Astrid, Gudrun, and Bjorn lived not by clocks, but by rhythm of the land, the light, the breath. When sleep came without struggle, and waking rose like the tide. But that world did not vanish in one night. It faded gradually, like embers dying under ash. The first shift came quietly. Candles, at first a luxury, a flicker of light that allowed a few more minutes of work or reading or prayer. It seemed harmless, useful even, but where once fire dictated sleep, now flame could delay it. Then came oil lamps, gaslight. Homes and cities glowed longer. Streets stayed lit. Shops remained open. The boundaries between day and night blurred. And with the industrial age, the true rupture arrived. Work moved from field to factory. Schedules tightened. Whistles marked the beginning of shifts. People were expected to rise not with the sun, but with the machine, and to sleep not when tired, but when told. Natural rhythms were bent to the needs of production. Sleep, once sacred, became a commodity. In a few short generations, the Viking longhouse gave way to crowded tenements. Quiet firelight was replaced by harsh bulbs. Shared sleep became isolated rooms. Bodies that once labored with purpose were confined to desks. The daily fatigue that led to deep, effortless rest was replaced with mental strain and physical stagnation. And then the world lit up. Electricity brought light at the flip of a switch. Televisions glowed in living rooms. Then came computers, then smartphones. Blue light bathed our eyes late into the night, tricking our brains into believing it was still day. The world never darkened, and so sleep never fully arrived. The ancient cues, dimming light, cooling air, communal stillness, were all stripped away, and yet the human body never forgot. Inside each of us still ticks a clock that longs for the rhythm of fire and silence. Melatonin still waits for darkness to do its work. The heart still slows when the world quiets. But now the world rarely does. We lie awake, overstimulated and underrested. We track sleep with devices, medicate insomnia, and label our exhaustion as a disorder. But what if the disorder isn't in us? What if it's in the world we've built? Bjorn never looked at a clock before lying down. Gudrun didn't swipe through news feeds in bed. Astrid didn't wonder if she was falling asleep quickly enough. They trusted the world around them to lead them into sleep, and that trust was never broken by artificial light or external pressure. Today we push against the body's need for rest. We hustle longer. We fear stillness. We equate sleep with weakness, with laziness, with lost time. But the Vikings saw sleep as strength. A warrior without rest was not feared. A mother without sleep could not heal. A mind without dreams was considered unmoored. The erosion of natural sleep didn't happen in defiance. It happened in distraction. One small invention at a time, one convenience after another, and each took us further from the primal knowledge our ancestors held close, that sleep is not a task, it is a return, back to self, back to silence, back to what we are when the noise falls away. And yet, even in this bright, restless world, we can find the way back. Turn off the artificial light. Dim the room. Let the fire or a candle be your final signal of day's end. Let silence grow. Let the body soften. Let the mind unravel without direction. You don't need to chase sleep. You only need to stop running from it. Thorvald's world is not gone. It lives in our memory, in our biology, in the deep part of us that still sighs when the lights go out. It lives in the quiet cup of herbal tea, in the weight of a blanket pulled to the chin, in the sound of wind tapping softly on the window. These are echoes of a time before the great disruption. They are invitations to return. Because even if the path was lost by firelight, we can still follow the shadows home. And when we do, we find something waiting, not a solution, not a cure, but a remembrance of how we used to sleep, and how, with gentleness and choice, we might sleep again. The night is quiet again, but now it is ours. Not in a longhouse beside a hearth, not under straw and fur, but here, wherever you are, in whatever space you've chosen to lie down and listen. The lights may be artificial, the clock still ticking, but behind the hum of modern life, something older stirs, something Viking. Astrid once told her daughter, Era, that sleep is not a thing to chase. It is like mist, she whispered. You walk into it. You do not hold it in your hand. And perhaps, more than 1,000 years later, this is what we need to remember. The way back to natural sleep is not through new methods, but ancient memory. Let us return to the beginning. Thorvald did not check his email before bed. Gudrun did not wonder if she was doing enough. Bjorn didn't feel guilt over waking in the night. Astrid didn't scroll. They slept without tools, without pressure, without performance. But what they had, what we can reclaim, was a sleep ecosystem. Their homes were dark, truly dark. You can try this. Turn off every light. Block out windows. Let your room descend into full shadow. Let your eyes remember what darkness feels like. Their nights were quiet. No background TV, no distant traffic. If you can't find silence, make softness, white noise, rainfall, the slow breath of something gentle. Their beds were firm but warm. Layer your bedding. Use natural fibers when you can. Not because it's trendy, but because your body knows the difference. It recognizes wool. It remembers warmth shared, not forced. They ate early. They finished meals before the body began to slow. No snacks in the blue glow of the fridge. No caffeine clinging to your veins. Just food that served the body and then stepped aside. They moved. Every day. They lifted, hauled, stirred, carved, carried. If you can, walk, stretch, use your muscles in ways that signal to the body, we have done enough. They fed by rhythm, not by schedule. You may not have seasons of light and dark like they did, but you can build rhythm, sleep at similar times, wake gently, let the body lead when it can. And perhaps most importantly, they let the mind rest too. No spiraling thoughts, no self-judgment for being tired, no chasing dreams or counting hours, just a quiet mind, settled by honesty and presence. You can't live a Viking life in the modern world, but you can borrow from it. You can put your phone down an hour before sleep. You can drink a cup of chamomile. You can turn your lights low and wrap yourself in stillness. You can let the night be enough. Let your bed be a boat, not a battleground. Let your breath be steady, like waves. Let the body soften. Let the mind follow. And if you wake in the night, as they did, don't panic. Sit up, stretch, sip warm water, whisper a thought, then lie back down. This is not failure. This is how it has always been. And now, at the end of this journey, let us leave you with something old. Era once asked Astrid for a song, not a tale, not advice, just a song, a quiet one, passed down from a mother who had passed it down from hers. Astrid sat near the fire, her fingers tracing lines into the wool, and sang, softly, slowly, words older than any book. Close your eyes where embers lie, wind outside and stars up high, stone and wool and skin and breath. Guard your dreams from time and death. Sleep, my child, the dark is kind. The moon has secrets yet to find. The fire will keep, the walls will hold. You are safe, you are warm, you are old. She never explained the last line. Ira asked once, Astrid only smiled. Because you've slept like this before, and maybe we all have. So as you lie there now, wherever you are, let your breath fall slower, let your thoughts quiet, let the night become soft again. There is no perfect condition, there is only returning to something simple, something sacred, something lost and remembered. Close your eyes, sleep like a Viking. You are safe, you are warm, you are old.